How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So I recently got a new dust collector, and as part of setting that up and making room for it in my shop, because it's pretty big, I had to do some pretty serious reorganization, and as part of that, I had to move this clamp storage from the other side of the shop over here to this wall. Now, I have posted pictures of this on Facebook and Instagram and places like that, I think. And I get a lot of attention with it because people like it. They think it's a really cool way to store your clamps, especially if you are in a small space. And it is. This thing's been great. I've had it for several years. But as you can see, it's got some older clamps in it, some cheaper clamps in it. And, again, it was a long time ago when I first got started. And as with any respectable woodworker, I have amassed a lot more clamps since then. And I need some way to store them because they are laying around all over the place in here and I can never find all of them when I need them. So I need to get them stored just like these. So I have to build another one of these to put over here, and we're going to do some other stuff too to create some more storage on this space, and this is going to become kind of like my clamp wall. But in any case, that's what I'm going to show you today. So if you want to see that, then stick around. All right, so let me start off by saying that this is not my original idea. I honestly don't remember where I got it from. I think it was probably a picture that I saw on Pinterest a long time ago, and I just designed it around that picture that I saw because I thought it was cool and it fit the needs that I had for my clamps in my space. Again, the construction is very simple, but you have to figure out how big you need it to be. And that's going to be based on what clamps you have, how many you have, the space that you're working with, all those sorts of things. But even more critical than that is getting the layout for these spaces and the spaces between the slots and the spaces between the slots, and figuring that all out. That takes a little bit of math and some time sitting down, drawing pictures, however you need to get to it. I'll show you how I do it. But, figuring that out is the hardest part. And then, putting it together is nothing. It's really simple. So let me show you what it does real quick. It's pretty simple. So I have this box, and this box. There's 3 separate boxes here, and each box contains a set of clamps. So right now I've got these on a glue up over here somewhere, but these are all some small 6-inch Bessie F-style clamps in this box, and they're easily accessible. Get them in and out of here. Now if I want to get to the bigger style F-style clamps that are behind it, I open up this latch, and I'll show this to you.
So I got these toggle latches from my local big box store. I believe that's what they're called, toggle latches. But I'll leave you an affiliate link down below for something similar, probably even better, from Amazon if you're interested in making one of these for yourself.
But anyway, you open up that latch and then you just pull this box open. It's hinged on the side, it opens up, and then you have access to all the clamps that are inside here. And it's the exact same thing for the back. There's another latch on this side. And then you just open up that box, which opens both of these together. And then you have access to the clamps that are in the back. And it's great on space. It's great on organization. And again, it's really cheap materials. I've had it for about 7 years and it still works perfectly fine. But now I need to make another one. So that's what we're going to do. Let's get at it.
All right, so before you go and design, you got to gather some information first, and that's going to be completely dependent upon what type of clamps you're going to use and how many you're going to put into your clamp storage. So in my case, in this situation, I have 5 of these big Bremen 48-inch parallel clamps, and those are the ones that I want to be in the back box. So that's going to determine the overall size of my entire clamp storage box and boxes, because the other ones are going to have the same size, just different heights, and then I will adjust those as necessary depending on what I'm putting in them. So in this case, again, I'm putting 5 of these in, and what I need to know here is how much space do I need for the fingers to have between them in order to fit the bars of the clamps. So in this case, it's going to be about 1/2 inch. I don't want it to be so tight that I have a hard time getting them in and out of there, and I don't want them to be sloppy either, but I also want to pick a measurement that's going to be easy for me to do the math to figure this out. So for me, in this case, 1/2 inch is going to work. Now, the other thing that I need to know is how much space do I need in between them when they're hanging there. So I need, how big the the pieces in between the spaces need to be when I make that design. So in this case, these need to be at least 1.75 inches, right about 1.75 inches. It's probably about 3/16 less than that. So 1.75 inches will give me just a little bit of space in between them and plenty of room to work with, and it also makes the math easy. So I'm going to take that information to go and do the design now. All right, so off camera, I went and figured out how I'm going to do this, and this is what I came up with. All right, so for box 1 and 2, meaning the very back box and the middle box, or the one in front of it, they're going to be the same because I'm putting those 48-inch Bremen clamps in there, and then on the second box, I'm putting basically the exact same clamp, but shorter, some 24-inch clamps in that. So they're going to be the same. So in order to get 5 of them in there, I need 5 of these spaces that are 1/2 inch apart, okay? And then I need them to be 1 3/4 inch in between all of them. And then I have whatever's left over at the ends, and I just randomly picked 1 inch because that's what I have on the other one. And that works out fine because it gives me a total when I add all of that up to 11.5 inches, which is exactly 3 inches wider than the other one, which is pretty close. All right, so box 1 and 2 is going to have this layout, and then box 3. Now, box 3, I'm not putting as big of clamps in there. I'm just going to put some regular type of squeeze clamps or bar clamps, F clamps like this probably, so I can get some more of them in there, and they don't require as much space in between. So those only require 1/4 inch of space in between. And so I went and figured out what that was going to take. So in order to put 8 of them, which would give me 8 times 0.25, which is 2 inches, right? So 8 of them at 2 inches with 1 inch of space in between, because that's all they need in between those. You're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those spaces in between. So that's 7 inches plus those 2 is 9. Now we know the entire width of the box is going to be 11.5. So now I need another 2.5 inches. So in order to get that, I need to make these two ends 1 1/4. So the only difference is that they're going to be 1/4 inch longer on the ends on that bottom box. So that's what we're going to do for box 3. Now that means the top and the bottom of each of those boxes is going to be that same pattern, because the clamps sit on the top, but the bars, sit in those spaces on the bottom as well and hold them in place. So I'm going to need 4 of these in order to make the box 1 and 2, and then I'll need 2 of these to make box 3. Okay? So now I just need to figure out what size of pieces that I need, and that's pretty easy because I knew going into it that I wanted it to be 29 inches tall. Okay? And I know that I'm using 3/4 inch material, and so I have 3/4 here and 3/4 here on the top and the bottom. Again, I'm putting the tops and the bottoms overlapping the sides, or sandwiching the sides in, because most of the pressure from the clamps is downward up here. So rather than having it all that pressure on the glue and brad nail, or if you screw it, screw joint there, it's the pressure is all getting put into those long boards there, and it's much more stable that way. So that's why I designed it that way. But in any case, I have this 1.5 inch between these two boards that I need to subtract from the 29, and that gives me 27.5 for the lengths of the two sides on that big box in the back. So I need 2 of each of 27.5 for the sides, and 2 of each of 11.5 for the top and the bottom. And then that's the only box 1, the one that's in the back, because this is the one that gets mounted to the wall. I'm also going to need a piece, 2 pieces actually, on the top and bottom in order to mount them. They're just cross supports, but they go all the way to the back so that I can use those to mount through them and hold the entire assembly to the wall. And in this case, again, it's 11.5 minus the 1.5, so those need to be 10 inches wide, give or take there. Actually, I'll probably cut them at a little over 10, because 3/4 inch plywood isn't actually 3/4 inch. It's a little bit smaller than that. And then I'll work down to get them exactly the length that I need to fit in there perfectly. All right, so box 2 is going to be just like the other box. That one happens to be 18 inches. So it's going to be the same thing, 18 minus the 1.5. So the 2 long pieces are going to be 16.5. The top and bottoms are also going to be 11.5. The whole thing is 11.5. So I need 2 each of those. And then for box 3, which is 6 inches tall, that means I need 2 side pieces of 4.5 and then 2 top and bottoms of 11.5. And that's all the pieces that I need to get prepared and get ready so that I can put the box together.
Oh yeah, I forgot one other thing. There was one flaw in this design that I need to fix this time around. So, like I said, I made these all out of 1x4 pine. It's nice because it comes already pre-dimensioned. You don't have to cut anything up, especially on the table saw, ripping pieces up or anything like that. But the problem is it's fine except for in this spot. Because the grain orientation is running this way in the pine, right? This way. And I'm cutting these little fingers out of it. Well, it's pretty easy to break it in that orientation. Doesn't take a lot of pressure to break that off. Now, it hasn't been a problem with this one, primarily because the clamps that I'm putting in here, even these, are very light. They're not very heavy. These are actually probably lighter than these. They're aluminum, so they're really light. The problem that I have now with the other ones, these big parallel clamps, they are a lot heavier than any of these other clamps. Do I think it would work? Maybe, probably, at least temporarily. But I think over time, pulling them in and out, I'm going to be breaking these off. And I have broken one of these before. You can't tell because I just glued it back on. It was one of the bottom ones over here. It doesn't get any pressure or anything on it, so it never fell back off again. But in any case, having all that weight on two of those, I think, is going to be problematic. And I want to get ahead of it. I don't want to be having to fix it or rebuild parts of it later. So instead of making it out of the 3/4 pine this time, or the 1x4 3/4 inch pine this time, I'm going to make it out of 3/4 inch plywood because it's going to be more rigid, it's going to be stronger, and it'll better support that weight of those clamps, especially on the top pieces. So my original intention, like we talked about earlier, was to make the whole thing out of 3/4 inch plywood so that I could get more rigidity on these fingers. However, I went and rummaged through my scrap wood cart, and it turns out that I do have enough 3/4 inch plywood scrap to make the tops and bottoms of all three boxes. And that's great because that's really the only place where I absolutely need it. But I don't have enough 3/4 inch ply to make the sides of the boxes. I do, however, have enough scrap pine to make the sides of the boxes. So that's what I'm going to do instead. I will make the sides with the pine. I will make the tops and bottoms with the plywood to get that rigidity that I need. And it's going to save me a trip to the big box store to buy more wood, specifically a sheet of 3/4 inch plywood that I'm only going to use like a quarter of, and then I have 3/4 of a sheet of plywood laying around for God knows how long. So instead of doing that, I can use scrap wood and I don't have to go buy anything extra. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to go to the table saw and do some ripping. So I ripped down that scrap plywood to the same width of the scrap 1x4s that I had, which was just under 3.5 inches. Then cut everything to length on the miter saw. But you can use just about any saw to do this part if you're using all 1x4s and don't have a miter saw. In fact, I think I just used a jigsaw or maybe even a simple handsaw for everything on the first one that I made. It's been so long now that I don't recall which, but I know I didn't have a miter saw at the time. Once the pieces were cut to size, I used a tape measure and a speed square to mark out all of the slots I needed to cut on the plywood pieces that would make up the tops and bottoms of the boxes. Next, I took them over to the drill press and drilled a hole at the end of each slot. Now, this can be done just as easily with a drill by hand, which is how I did it the first time, but this was much more efficient to set up a temporary fence and use the drill press this time. Then I took them over to the bandsaw to make the cuts on either side of the holes in order to create all of the slots. Again, I used either a jigsaw or a handsaw to do this on the first one, so a bandsaw isn't necessary, but it's definitely a lot faster and easier this way, and it leaves you with some much cleaner cuts. At this point, I'm ready to assemble the boxes, which is nothing more than some glued up butt joints and a few brad nails. Because the weight of the clamps bear down on the sides of the boxes and is carried by the hinges, it's not necessary to use screws or anything else here, but you can if you want. I did opt to use screws instead of brads on the mounting supports at the back of the big box this time though, since the combined weight of the clamps they would be holding to the wall would be significantly greater this time around. With all that done, the next thing to do is to assemble the rack by attaching the boxes together with the hinges.
I just used some 3-inch hinges from the big box store, using 2 to attach the big box to the middle box, and then 1 to attach the small front box to the middle box. The key thing to pay attention here is just to make sure that the hinges are mounted on the opposite side that you want the boxes to open from. And if you don't have any self-centering bits like these, get some, because they are essential for drilling holes in the center of a hole or a countersink like these hinges. The last thing left to do before mounting the rack on the wall is to add the toggle latches. If you're wondering why these are even necessary, it's for 2 main reasons. One, it holds the other boxes together when you pull open the one that you need access to, rather than them all kind of flopping around every time you try to open it. The other reason is because I live in California, and in case of an earthquake or anything else that might shake your house up, it keeps everything closed up so that your expensive clamps don't go flying around getting damaged or damaging other expensive things in your shop when something like that happens. Finally, I added some pre-drilled countersinks to the mounting supports to make install easier. I forgot to hit record on the camera, but installation is as simple as holding the rack up in place, making sure it's level, and then running a drill bit through your pre-drilled countersinks to mark holes in the wall where you intend to screw it on. It's ideal to hit at least 1 stud, but if the rack is small enough like these, you should be okay with some good quality anchors. I prefer the screw-in type of anchors like these over the cheaper ones that you just tap in with a hammer like these. My first rack held with only anchors for several years without any issue at all, but my advice is to try to get at least 1 stud, especially if you're making something larger than these. Once the rack is mounted, the absolute final step is to add some dowels for strength and stability. This Rockler 3/8-inch doweling jig that I'm using is perfect for this application, as it's specifically made to center a 3/8-inch dowel on a 3/4-inch thick board. I use the jig to make a hole on the front of the box frames of the back and center boxes, use a dowel center marking tool to mark the corresponding spot on the back of the box frames of the center and front boxes, and then use the jig to drill the dowel holes on those sides. Then I glue a 3/8-inch dowel into the holes on the front of the back and center boxes, and only the front, not into the back, because then your boxes won't open. So now when you close the box, that dowel will serve as a guide pin to both keep the boxes in alignment and also to provide additional support to share the load with the hinges when the boxes are closed, as they will be the majority of the time. And that's it. The last thing to do is to load up all your clamps, step back, and admire your new clamp storage system.
All right, so that's going to be it for today. Now, you're probably wondering why I mounted them so high up. Well, for one thing, I'm 6'1", and it's not a problem for me to access them up here. It might look kind of weird, but it's not difficult for me to get to them, so it's not a big deal as far as that goes. And the other reason is I had this stand, this corner stand, that I bought brand new about a year and a half ago. It's been sitting in the box the whole time. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I only bought it because I got it for dirt cheap, like $20 or something. It was on clearance. This is the only available corner in my whole shop where I could even possibly put it anymore. So I decided to put it there and put these up over it so that I could get it up inside there, underneath there, and get some extra storage space. So that's why they're up so high. You might also be wondering, why all the empty spaces? Well, when I made this, I didn't want to make it and then not have room to add at least a few more clamps. So I do have some empty spaces that I can fill some more clamps in here. These are actually full. They're being used somewhere else right now. Now, that's not all the clamps that I have. So I have a whole bunch of these spring-loaded Rockler clamps, which I love. And to be honest with you, these are probably the ones that I use the most nowadays. I have another plan for those. I'm not going to put them up here because they're kind of a weird size because of the springs that are in the bottom of them. And Rockler has an F-style clamp holder. It's just a L-shaped piece of metal that's made for storing these. And I think what I'm probably going to do is either come up with something on my own to either mount them all across here or maybe across this area here. But they're going to be in this area. This is going to be the clamp area, so this is where they're going to live. And then I also have, and I'm not exaggerating, probably 100 at least different kinds of clamps. I just grabbed a handful of different ones to throw them here to show you, from stuff that's used for pocket holes to, God, I probably have 50 or 60 of these spring clamps in different shapes and sizes, and then tons of these. Now these, I have another idea for these because I primarily use these in the CNC, so I probably won't put them over here. But all these other ones, I need a place for them to live too. And my plan is, now that this is done, is to put a couple of shelves in here, in between these two, maybe even down here, that I can put all of that stuff in, and then all of the clamps are going to live right there when I'm done. But that is all for today. I will put links, affiliate links, down in the description below of all of the tools and materials and all that stuff that I used for this, so that if you want to make one of these, you can do it yourself too. I mean, you can probably find most of this stuff in your local big box store, but if you don't want to make that drive and you want to just support the channel, you can probably get it cheaper on Amazon. So I'll leave links for, if not the exact same thing, something very similar below. And you can support the channel by using those links, and it doesn't cost you anything. Well, that all said, I hope you enjoyed this, and maybe you guys can get something out of it. But we're done here for today. So as always, thank you for watching. Stay safe and happy woodworking. I will see you on the next one.